Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when an American icon, known for fighting battles on screen, decides to take one on in real life? That's exactly what unfolded when Sylvester Stallone sat down on The View and squared off against Joy Behar over one of the most heated issues for millions of seniors. Should Social Security income be taxed? The audience buzzed with energy the moment Stallone walked out, greeted by a standing ovation from older fans who saw him not just as Rocky, but as someone who lived through the same struggles they face today. But if the applause was warm, Joy's opening was anything but. With her trademark bite, she leaned in and asked whether Stallone really believed seniors deserved a free pass on paying taxes while younger generations carried the load. What followed wasn't just a debate. It was a generational clash, a collision between Hollywood grit and daytime sharpness. The studio became an arena, each word striking like a jab, each reaction from the audience pushing the moment further into viral territory. And by the end, it was clear this wasn't going to be forgotten anytime soon. The moment the applause for Sylvester Stallone died down, Joy Behar wasted no time cutting straight to the topic. She leaned across the table, lips pursed, eyes narrowing with that familiar mix of humor and challenge. Rocky, you're a tough guy, but are you really telling America that seniors should never pay taxes on Social Security? Because, let's be honest, that money has to come from somewhere. The room chuckled lightly at her delivery, but Stallone didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his hands clasped, his voice low but firm. Joy, look, I'm not saying people shouldn't contribute, but Social Security isn't a handout. People worked for that money their entire lives. It's theirs. Taxing it again feels like punishing them twice. A ripple of applause came from the audience, mostly from older viewers who nodded with recognition. Joy smirked, tilting her head. Punished? Or contributing like everybody else? Teachers, firefighters, young families, they all pay their fair share. Why should seniors get a pass just because they've retired? Stallone raised his eyebrows. Because they already paid. My father worked 60 years in a beauty shop. 60 years. He paid taxes every year. And then when he finally got his Social Security check, the government dipped into it again. That's not sharing the load. That's double dipping. The audience clapped louder now, some shouting, "That's right," while others booed softly. The tension in the room thickened. Joy didn't back down. She tapped her cards on the table and shot back. But Sylvester, without those taxes, how do we keep the system afloat? You can't run a country on feelings. Someone has to pay for the roads, the schools, the health care. If everyone says, "Well, I paid once, that's enough," the system collapses. Stallone leaned in, his voice rougher now. Joy, look, that's where priorities come in, Joy. Don't tell me the government can't find money. They always find it for wars, for bailouts, for things that don't help the average person. But when it comes to seniors, the people who built this country, they certainly act like it's too expensive to show respect. The studio erupted. Applause and whistles filled the air as Stallone sat back, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on Joy. Joy folded her arms, feigning calm. Respect doesn't pay the bills, Sylvester. The numbers have to add up. You know that. You've made blockbuster films. You understand budgets. If we don't tax Social Security, where does the money come from? Or do you just want to roll the dice and hope the economy doesn't crash? Stallone chuckled dryly, shaking his head. You're comparing people's lives to Hollywood budgets. That's the problem. You look at seniors as numbers on a page. I look at them as people, neighbors, grandparents, veterans. You tax their dignity when you tax their Social Security. The audience gasped at the line. Joy's face stiffened. Even Whoopi, sitting in the moderator's chair, raised her eyebrows. Okay, I think we all agree this is complicated. But neither Stallone nor Joy was ready to give up ground. Joy interrupted, her voice sharper. Dignity is making sure everyone contributes, not just sticking younger generations with the bill. Stallone leaned forward again, locking eyes with her. And dignity is letting people keep what they earned after a lifetime of work. You don't punish them for getting old. The room roared. Half the audience cheered Stallone, while the other half booed or clapped for joy. The tension had fully arrived. What began as playful sparring now felt like the start of something much bigger. The table was alive with tension, and the studio audience could feel it. Joy Behar wasn't about to let Stallone's last line hang in the air unchallenged. She leaned forward, her red-framed glasses catching the light, her tone laced with sarcasm. "So what, Sylvester? You're saying seniors should get a free ride? That's not how America works. We don't get to retire from responsibility." Stallone tilted his head, smirk tugging at his lips. "Free ride? Joy, you call 50 years of work a free ride? You call paying into Social Security every single paycheck a free ride? That's not retirement from responsibility. That's retirement with dignity." The audience burst into applause, with shouts of "Yes," and "Tell him, Sly," echoing from the back rows. Whoopi Goldberg, sitting between them, shook her head with a sigh. "Whew, you two are gonna give me a headache before the show is over." But Joy wasn't laughing. Her voice sharpened. "You're making it sound so simple. But Social Security isn't a magic piggy bank. The money doesn't appear out of thin air. If we stop taxing it, we risk draining the system entirely. What happens then, huh? What happens to the people who actually need it when the fund dries up?" Stallone's eyes narrowed. He raised his hand slightly, as if weighing her words. "What happens is the government finally has to face its waste. Stop throwing billions overseas. Stop bailing out corporations that don't care about regular folks. The money's there. They just don't want to give it to the people who earned it." The audience erupted again, whistles and claps thundering across the set. Whoopi Goldberg, sitting between them, shook her head with a sigh. "Whew, you two are going to give me a headache before the show's over." But Joy wasn't laughing. Her voice sharpened. "You're making it sound so simple, but Social Security isn't a magic piggy bank. The money doesn't appear out of thin air. If we stop taxing it, we risk draining the system entirely. What happens then, huh? What happens to the people who actually need it when the fund dries up?" Stallone leant back in his chair, crossing his arms, his gravelly voice steady. "Joy, the drama isn't in my words. It's in reality. Try telling the 75-year-old who worked their whole life that their benefits have to shrink because politicians mismanage the fund. That's the real tragedy. They shouldn't have to keep paying into a system they already bankrolled." The audience applauded again, louder than before, the claps echoing like thunder. Some viewers stood, nodding, while others shook their heads, siding with Joy. Joy, unfazed, pressed on. "So what's your solution? Just wave a magic wand and say, 'No more taxes'? That's not a plan. That's pandering to people who want everything without sacrifice." Stallone sat forward again, voice tightening, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "You call keeping your own money wanting everything? That's insulting. These people gave their sacrifice already. They sacrificed decades of their lives building this country. And now you want to squeeze them one more time." The crowd gasped, then broke into applause so loud the producers had to signal for quiet. Sonny Hostin jumped in, trying to mediate. Okay, let's pull back. There are real arguments on both sides here." But Joy waved her off, eyes still locked on Stallone. "Sacrifice doesn't end when you hit 65. Society survives because everyone does their part. If seniors stop paying in, younger families will have to cover the gap. How is that fair?" Stallone turned toward the audience, his voice rising like a rallying cry. "You hear that? She's saying fairness is taxing the people who already gave the best years of their lives. That's not fairness. That's cruelty dressed up as policy." The room roared, the sound nearly outdrowning the co-host's attempts to regain control. Joy shot back, her voice trembling now with intensity. "And you're saying fairness is letting billionaires like yourself escape while struggling workers foot the bill. Don't stand here pretending you're the voice of the people when your tax bracket doesn't even blink at a Social Security deduction." The audience gasped at the jab, some cheering, some booing. Stallone clenched his jaw, visibly holding himself back before answering. His voice was quieter now, but each word carried weight. Joy, I didn't come here to talk about myself. I came here to talk about my parents, my neighbors, the people in Philadelphia who worked in factories, in shops, who never had millions. This isn't about me. It's about them. And they're tired of being treated like a piggy bank for a system that forgot them. The audience erupted once more, louder than before, split right down the middle. The clash had gone from heated debate to something raw, something personal, and it was clear neither side was backing down.
The studio was buzzing like a live wire. Every clap, every gasp, every boo carried the weight of a national argument. Stallone sat rigid, his broad shoulders squared, his jaw tight as Joy tried to fire another shot. But before she could, he raised his hand, not in aggression, but to steady himself. His voice lowered, softer now, almost gravelly with memory. You want to talk about fairness, Joy? Let me tell you about my mother. The audience instantly hushed. Even Joy blinked, her expression shifting slightly as Stallone's eyes fixed on the floor for a moment before returning to the table. She worked nights at a bowling alley when I was a kid. She'd come home smelling like smoke, her hands raw from cleaning, her back aching. And you know what? She paid her taxes. Every dime, every year. She never complained. She believed the system would take care of her when she couldn't work anymore. But when she finally started collecting her Social Security check, they taxed it, taxed the very money she had already given her life to earn. I watched her cry at that kitchen table, wondering how she'd keep the lights on. That's what I'm talking about. That's what this means. The room was silent, the weight of the story hanging heavy. Several audience members dabbed their eyes. A few murmurs of "that's not right" rippled through the crowd. Joy shifted in her chair, visibly rattled, but she quickly collected herself, adjusting her glasses. That's a powerful story, Sylvester, I'll give you that. But your mother's experience doesn't erase the bigger picture. There are millions of people, single mothers, young workers, immigrants, who rely on a balanced system. If you stop taxing Social Security, the burden shifts to them, and I refuse to say that's fair. The crowd reacted with a mix of claps and boos, torn between compassion and logic. Stallone leaned closer, his voice rising again, but still laced with raw emotion. Joy, you're missing the point. My mother's story isn't unique. It's the story of millions of seniors in this country. They worked hard, they sacrificed, and now they're being told, sorry, you've got to sacrifice again. That's not balance. That's betrayal. The audience cheered, loud and sustained, forcing the producers to hold for several seconds. Joy pressed her lips together, then fired back, sharper now. You keep using words like betrayal and dignity, but you're ignoring reality. Without those taxes, the program risks collapse. What do you say to the seniors 20 years from now when their checks stop coming because we gutted the system to make today easier? Stallone exhaled sharply, gripping the table, his voice almost trembling. I say the government should stop wasting trillions elsewhere and start honoring the people who earned it. Don't put the blame on seniors. Don't make them the scapegoat for a system politicians mismanaged. They shouldn't carry that burden. Whoopi tried to break in again. Okay, let's breathe for a second. But the audience was already alive with noise, cheers, boos, chants of "that's right," mixing into a chaotic chorus. The clash had become more than just an argument. It was a battle of philosophies with real human stories at its center. Joy leaned in, her voice quieter but cutting. Sylvester, you're speaking from the heart, and I respect that, but policies can't be written on tears and applause. They have to be written on numbers. Without taxes on Social Security, there may be nothing left for the very people you're defending. Stallone locked eyes with her, his voice raw. And what good is a system that survives by breaking the very people it's meant to protect? The audience gasped again, some erupting into applause, others shaking their heads. The emotional peak had arrived, and everyone in the room felt it. This wasn't just policy anymore. It was personal, it was human, and it was tearing the studio in half. The atmosphere in the studio was electric, heavy with the tension of Stallone's last line.
Joy Behar sat back in her chair for a moment, lips pursed, before leaning forward again. Her voice cut through the noise. "You know what, Sylvester? You're good at telling stories. You can tug at the heartstrings, no doubt about it. But this isn't a Hollywood script. It's the real world. And in the real world, if you stop taxing Social Security, the system will collapse under its own weight. You're selling people a fantasy." Gasps rippled across the audience. Some booed, others clapped, but all eyes swung back to Stallone. His jaw tightened, his hand curled into a fist on the table. For a moment, he said nothing, his silence more powerful than words. Then, in that gravelly voice, he fired back. "Fantasy? Let me tell you something, Joy. What's fantasy is thinking seniors can be squeezed forever and nothing will break. What's fantasy is telling someone who fought in wars, who worked in factories, who raised families, that they're a burden when they ask to keep what they earned. That's the fantasy, and it's cruel." The crowd erupted, half cheering wildly, half booing just as loudly. The noise was so intense, Whoopi Goldberg raised her hands, shouting, "People, please!" But the audience didn't quiet. Joy's face flushed red. She slammed her cards onto the table. "Cruel? You think it's cruel to ask everyone to pay their fair share? What's cruel is letting billionaires and millionaires like you escape while a single mom making 35 grand a year shoulders the weight. Don't preach fairness when your reality is so far from theirs." The audience roared at the jab, with some standing in support of Joy while others jeered. Stallone's face darkened. He leaned forward, his voice booming now. "This isn't about me. Stop making it about me. I could walk away tomorrow and I'd be fine. This is about the people you claim to care about. The seniors who are deciding between paying for medicine or heating their homes because Washington wants a second bite of their paycheck." The studio broke into chaos. Some clapped so hard their hands stung. Others booed. Others shouted, "Let him talk." Security shifted uneasily along the edges of the stage. Joy, now visibly rattled but unwilling to back down, pointed a finger across the table. "You're using them as props, Sylvester. You're making this about villains and heroes when it's really about arithmetic. If the numbers don't add up, the checks don't come. That's the truth." Stallone shot to his feet, slamming his palm on the table so hard the mugs rattled. The sound silenced the room for a beat. His voice thundered, raw and unfiltered. "The truth is this. Seniors are not villains. They're not freeloaders. They're the backbone of this country, and they deserve respect, not another tax bill shoved in their faces." The audience exploded. Some stood cheering, others booed furiously. Whoopi raised her voice over the chaos. Okay, let's calm down. Sylvester, sit down, please. Joy, let's not—" But the damage was done. The breaking point had arrived. Joy shook her head, lips pressed tight, refusing to speak further. Stallone stayed standing, chest heaving, eyes blazing, until finally he sat back down, the tension radiating off him like heat. The crowd's noise lingered, a mix of admiration, anger, and shock. Everyone knew they had just witnessed a moment that would go viral before the day was over. As the chaos finally subsided, the studio felt different, charged, unsettled, almost vibrating with what had just happened. Sylvester Stallone sat rigid in his chair, his jaw still tense, while Joy Behar remained tight-lipped, her arms crossed in defiance. The other co-hosts exchanged uneasy glances, knowing this wasn't just another fiery segment. This was one for the books. Whoopi tried to reel things back in. "Look, folks, this is why these conversations matter, because real people are living through this. We may not agree, but we can't ignore it." Her words were steady, but even she seemed shaken. The audience mirrored the split on stage. Some clapped for Stallone, shouting, "Respect the seniors!" while others cheered Joy for holding the line on responsibility. A few just sat quietly, stunned at how far the clash had gone. Backstage, producers were already buzzing, sensing the segment was about to explode online. Clips of Stallone slamming the table and Joy firing back would be on every platform before the afternoon was out. Hashtags like Stallone versus Joy, taxing dignity, and social security debate were practically writing themselves. For Stallone, the emotional peak wasn't about politics, it was about pride and memory. For Joy, it was about holding the line on what she saw as hard truth. Neither had won in the traditional sense, but both had left scars on the debate that would outlast the moment. By the time the credits rolled, it was clear the fight would follow them long after the camera stopped. Seniors watching at home were moved to tears, while younger viewers debated furiously in comment sections. The clash had transcended television. It had tapped into something raw, something personal, something millions of families were already arguing about at their own kitchen tables. And for those who saw it live, one thing was certain. They'd never forget the day Sylvester Stallone and Joy Behar turned The View into a battlefield over dignity, fairness, and the very meaning of Social Security. If you enjoyed this powerful showdown, make sure to subscribe for more dramatic celebrity clashes, unforgettable talk show moments, and emotional debates that get everyone talking. And tell us in the comments, do you think Social Security income should be tax-free?